Welcome to the ADNA Presents. Today we have Bridget Melton. She is coming back again for a very interesting, fascinating interview. I can't wait to start this. She is an audio description writer and narrator. She specializes in live and extemporaneous description. Thanks so much for joining us, Bridget.
Hi.
I guess let's jump in with the question, what has changed since the last interview we did together?
Yeah, because I looked back and I realized we haven't spoken on the podcast since June 2021. We had done a deep dive into Hamilton visuals with Melody Goodspeed. So I feel like there has been quite a bit changed. I've been working more on streaming media. Finally got my foot in the door on that as a writer and a narrator. And that's just been such a different look into the audio description world since I've come from more of the live event and kind of cultural accessibility world. And I've been really enjoying, I'm narrating stuff that I didn't write, which I've never done before. I've always been the person that's doing everything. And so I've been really enjoying narrating something that somebody else has done all of the editing work and they've decided what the visuals are going to be. And I do feel like that narration has been helping my writing, where I'm like, oh, I need to be way kinder to my narrators of what the pronunciation is, where to find this pronunciation, adding in more punctuation. I didn't realize so much of narration is done as cold readings. And so I've always made sure to read my stuff out loud and make sure that I'm giving my narrator something that can be read aloud. But I didn't realize kind of just the importance of all of my almost over punctuating to make sure that they understand the flow if they're kind of blind reading something. So I've been really enjoying that, getting into the streaming world.
Very great. And let's go
Yeah.
back to what you originally said about that segmented experience of doing the other way. You've mentioned how your narration has influenced your writing. In this context, coming from that extemporaneous description and doing live announcing for audio description, that it was really combining a lot of different areas that are now separated. So you said that you were doing the narration only. That means, in my mind, that you're exposed to a script. You may or may not have early access to the content ahead of time. How has that affected you, if anything comes to mind?
It's definitely made me so much more aware as a writer. So since I'm narrating it and I may not know exactly what the visuals are that go along with my script, I've become so much more aware of my word choice and not being repetitive and being very specific. It can be frustrating to read, and I'm sure to hear a whole lot about somebody's brow furrowing or they're glancing. I was just recently watching, so I am sighted, and I was watching Fantastic Beasts: Secrets of Dumbledore on HBO Max. And I was having such a fun time with the audio description because the writer was letting the actors do the acting. There were very few instances where we were getting descriptions of kind of what the characters' faces were doing, specifically because, the acting is fantastic in that. And I was really enjoying that every once, if it was a character all by themselves, then we might learn about how Dumbledore is reacting to the environment because he's by himself in this restaurant. But for the most part, it was, let's focus on the plot. Let's focus on, I loved the writer kept giving, I felt like they had a really great age appropriateness. They kept giving scale for things and reminding us how small the little bow trickle is. Bow, I think is its name, how small that is in relation to everything else in this world, because it is a tiny little twig person living in Newt's pocket. And they just had nice little visuals like that kept popping up where I was like, ooh, I got to remember this as writing that I've really enjoyed. And I definitely enjoyed the narrator too. It wasn't throwing me off at all that it's primarily a British accented cast and it was a American voice narrator. But it didn't bother me because it's such a multicultural cast in terms of we've got some Americans characters, there's some British characters, German and everything, that it really worked for me. And I wasn't taken away by that at all. But yeah, I just really liked kind of the age appropriateness that was cropping up in this Secrets of Dumbledore on HBO Max.
What a great example. And I love how you previously had mentioned how your writing is now influenced by punctuation and pronunciation, including. And you mentioned repeating furrowed brow or whatever, that there's little pieces of awareness that are coming to you as a writer. Not that you weren't an exceptional writer to begin with, but these little extra things are giving a little more attention. And in your example here with this film that you mentioned, the writer didn't need to fill in everything. And I'd imagine as a writer who is coming into audio description, who has the gumption comes to mind, but there's this work ethic that I have to do the best I can. And one of the ways to do that is to write as many possible words as silence allows. And what I'm hearing from you is that in this experience that you had, you were able to fully immerse yourself into the story, know the relative size of things that, because it's obviously in this world of Harry Potter, things are a little different, but you were able to really focus on the story. If you were to talk to a new writer who is getting into audio description, who has that go get it attitude, which is so important, but might not necessarily serve our audience, what would be a way that you would share with someone like that?
Definitely, I would have them never stop learning in terms of going to writing workshops. I just recently took a huge 2 weekend long intensive with the audio description training retreats. And it's like, it doesn't matter that I've been in there for, I've been in the space for 5 years. There's always something you can learn. I have different meetups that I'm part of so that we can talk about what are the trends we're seeing? What are expert users saying about these projects that we're working on? Are people liking what we're doing? Are they not? Because that's ultimately who it's for, is the blind community and the low vision community. They are the primary people that we're doing this for. And so what do they say about it? So being part of like forums and stuff where you're actually getting firsthand feedback and not just talking with other audio describers and things like that. But yeah, to just never stop learning and to also keep turning it on your media, keep watching things with your audio description on so that you get a feel for what you like and don't like yourself. Because yeah, like watching Secrets of Dumbledore, if I hadn't turned it on, I just wouldn't have realized this has a really great audio description track to it. Versus sometimes you can listen to some and you're like, I don't like the way this person wrote at all. And I'm going to make note of this about what I'm not liking. I'm not liking that I didn't get a silence here, or that I don't feel like I got a moment for this scene to land and end. There was no button on this scene because the audio describer kept going. And sometimes you need to, because you've got to, preload because there's about to be a big set change. And so that can be frustrating. But again, that goes back to writing and narrating, where I'm going to cut my words so that the narrator has a moment to give a pause and get a beat before launching into the next scene. If you can do things like that so that you are giving people time to actually process what they've been listening to, instead of just a rapid fire, here's everything that's happening on the screen. Oh, they're talking again. Here's everything happening on the screen. So yeah, kind of just never stop learning. There's always somebody has great insight that you haven't met them yet. So
what a great perspective. And I got to say, from my perspective as a voice talent, that training that you're talking about has made such a difference. Ongoing training never stops. It's not like there's this thing, and at least in the voiceover side, where it's like, okay, I'm done. It's never. It's always going to be adjusting and tweaking. And the other day I took a class and it was so satisfying to learn something that I hadn't seen before. And it's like, oh, I can do that now. I can apply this. And you also mentioned meetups. I know you've got your own. We've got when Kevin and I started the audio description discussion group on Facebook, the intent there was to connect our audiences. And what I'm hearing throughout our conversation here is that this connection that you've got, both with the audiences of your films and TV that you're working on, whether it's writing or voicing or both, but there's also a connection for your own growth. And you had said some things that you like and that you don't like about listening to audio description. I'm wondering if we could transition from the more objective, or the more, let's call it the craft, into the subjectivity of it. In other words, I use an example myself. I might remind somebody of somebody's ex-boyfriend and they hear my voice and it's just going to be nails on a chalkboard. And it's like, let's find somebody else. Or there might be inappropriate casting that happened where it's like, I'm a sighted white dude and this is not the content that I should be voicing. Could you talk a little bit more about the subjectivity though, outside of those examples, something that's like, there's just something that just doesn't work for me, but it works for other people. Is there anything that comes to mind when I ask about subjectivity like that?
I mean, other than like the top of my mind is just when I think of, I am a white, cisgender, sighted female writer. And so there are definitely projects that I just don't need to be a part of, because I mean, even when it comes down to like, I might not know the cultural references, it's going to take me so much longer to recognize the cultural references that I don't even know, that I don't even know that I'm missing on it. The Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, on their YouTube channel, they have a really great two-part series. It's BIPOC service providers, and they have one specifically for audio describers. And so there's an audio describer there, Ashley Braggs. She is Black, and she talks about this project she's working on where this character is wearing a bonnet, and she just starts going into kind of the history of it and why this specifically should be part of the description because it says so much about the character. And she starts going into all of these things where it's like, my life experience did not lead me to know anything other than visually, I know that's a bonnet. And she had such a rich description for why she would even be including it and when she would put it in her description, that it's like, this is why you hire the right people. You hire people that because especially with all of these super tight deadlines that we're having now on all of the projects, that it's like, hire the right person so that they can actually meet your deadline, versus if you don't have these cultural touchstones, you're having to go down hours of Google research trying to educate yourself. And so it's like, if you just hire the right person for the job, you can just cut out so much extra time that just didn't need to be there. And you're just going to get richer descriptions because they're going to immediately know those touchstones.
That's great to hear. And I love how it's the right thing to do, but it's also the practical and
very
helpful thing
practical
to do.
Yeah.
Really great perspective. Thank you for sharing that, especially off the top of your head. That was great. Let's move on. I'm wondering about, now that you're doing more film and TV as a writer and a voice talent or narrator, what's some challenges that you've come across that maybe you weren't expecting, that you're really proud of how you I solved it this way. This was really satisfying.
So one of the things, like kind of since our last interview, I have recently have taken on my first in-person live event. In May, I worked a conference, and it was really great to just be back in a room. But there's this big difference between being the in-person audio describer versus I am in a studio doing something for streaming. When you hire me in person, you're hiring me also as a consultant. I am crafting that patron experience, and it's always kind of hard with a first-time client where you're just like, how far do I go in educating you? Because you've reached out to hire me, so you have some idea of what an audience member may have requested, but I don't know where you are on your journey of accessibility. So I don't know if we need to talk about fully crafting this patron experience from when they first walk into the conference. What are the signs and symbols that we're putting out there? Is there somebody greeting them? All of these things, all of these little touch points for that patron that really, it comes with hiring me. It's not necessarily my job. There should be an accessibility team that you have in place that I am just a plug and play part of it. But it's very much part of what makes live audio description so rich and so fun, is because you have a direct connection to people. And I was not expecting, going into the streaming world, how little you have to do with the overall project. So I will be hired as, I am just the narrator. That is my role. Because I'm narrating, and hopefully I've been doing some things that are kind of back catalog. So you're going to have the entire series at once. And so I do really like when you get the chance to describe an entire series and you're like, I'm kind of being QC right now. I am putting together, yes, this name sounds familiar. I remember that they had, as I'm reading, as I'm narrating, I'm making the visuals in my head to make sure that the writing makes sense, that these are the right characters that are being named. Okay, but that's kind of all you get. And if you're the writer, you're just the writer. You're not getting to craft any part of the patron experience except for what your script writing was. You don't get a say in how the narrator is going to be delivering it. So that's been a bit of a challenge, just trying to not control everything, which is good because you need more people involved in it, especially when it's going to such a huge audience as streaming does. You need to have somebody who is blind involved in the process. You need to have the writer's perspective, the narrators, the engineers and everything, the QC people, because everybody, having all of those people involved is going to create a much richer script and experience, just because with so many people overseeing pieces, ideally, you're getting a better product because somebody's saying that's not the right word choice here, or language has changed. This is now what we should say. And, fitting the right narrator's voice to a project. It's like, ooh, in live description, you kind of get what you get. You get whoever is that live describer, and that's it. You don't have much choice sometimes. I've been really enjoying kind of letting go with the streaming world and being like, I'm just going to do the best at what you have specifically hired me for. And I might give some pushback. I might say, I don't think this is the right writing here, or this character's name just popped up out of nowhere. Are we sure that this is the character in this scene? Or is it somebody else's name that is oddly familiar, like similar, but that's not the right person? And so there is a little bit of QC like that. So I do appreciate when studios let you have a safe enough space to be able to say, I have a flag here. Like, let's talk about this.
Very nice. And it sounds like those kinds of resources that you may or may not have access to as a voice talent really do make an impact. In other words, that as a voice talent, because you are, if I could use the word segmented away from the writing that you're used to, there's a certain amount of content that you have, and there are advantages to being able to have as much resources as possible. In the same way that you were talking about the cultural information that you may or may not have access to, that is a resource that is important in that context. I'm thinking about resources beyond just cultural experiences that you have or haven't had. I'm thinking about access to, for example, the content, whether it's the visuals or the more specifically the audio, and how that could have an impact on what you do. I mean, this is a conversation we could talk for 6 hours on. I don't want to get stuck on this, but what I'm hearing is that the challenge that you are enjoying overcoming is that coming from this live description where you are the in-person consultant doing many roles. I'd call you an auteur, if I may, that you're doing the writing, you're doing the voicing, you're doing the casting, you're doing the consulting, you're doing the education, you're doing the filling in the gaps as they come along. You're producing a full thing. And now in film and television, you're kind of isolated into this one kind of role, and collaboration seems like it's got to be really important. Now that you have experienced so much more film and TV in both roles, whether it's writing or narration, is there a connection between the two that you'd like to see grow? Or maybe it's better just because it is so separate. Maybe it is better to keep it separate.
I would absolutely love to see more collaboration, especially if you are having multiple people writing on a series or even on a season. Why is there not a collaborative document? I mean, luckily working on back catalog stuff, there's some phenomenal fan wikis out there. Like the very first show that I was writing on, I was so grateful for the fan wiki that was like, oh, good. I know that all of the writers were all calling, it was a sci-fi show. I'm so glad that we all are calling this gun the exact same gun. We are calling these aliens the exact same race of aliens that they are. And the fan wiki was just like everything you ever needed as a writer, all in one spot. And other shows, though, where there might be 4 writers, but you don't know who they are. And you might be, I'm doing the first episode, 5th episode, 10th episode. And I feel like there's a lot of time wasted catching yourself up from episode to episode to be like, I don't know what they may have described in this other one, but I, as a writer, I feel the need that I now need to watch all of the other episodes so that I know in the 10th episode, I know what might be an Easter egg from episode 6 or something, and I didn't write episode 6. So I definitely, especially among writers, I would love to have a lot more collaboration, even if it's just like a shared document where I can see everybody else's writing of their episodes. I think that would just be immensely helpful. And I also wouldn't mind having more writers reviewing other people's scripts and really helping making sure that if you are having multiple writers on a series, that you're having consistent scripts, you're having consistent language and consistent ideas about what needs to be described and what doesn't. I was working on a show where I kind of set the tone with the first 3 episodes, and then writers took off for the rest of the series. And it was really nice that we had a shared document that didn't grow too much, but we did have a kind of a basis of, in this city that we are describing, which is a major kind of character in the show, that we are using the terminology specific to that city where it might not be common knowledge, what this kind of architectural style is, but we're going to name it what that architecture style is because that is the flavor of the show. And we're all going to call it these same things. So having collaboration among writers would just be phenomenal. And if a writer could be in the room when you're narrating something, I think that it might be a little intimidating for me to hear somebody narrating my work. But I feel like it would just be so enriching to have then that narrator be like, oh man, that narrator is really flubbing over maybe I write too many alliterations sometimes, or I was clearly not clear with my script writing because I don't think that they see the visual in their mind. I don't feel like they are narrating a visual, so I don't think I wrote it right. And I wouldn't mind if writers got to be in the room a little bit more with that as well.
What a great experience. And one of the things that has come up at least two or three times in our conversation today is the time wasted, that it feels like there are some system setups that if companies don't choose to do things the way that you're suggesting, that time is literally wasted. Obviously, time means a lot with deadlines and such. I just wanted to bring that up and see if anything else pops up that you wanted to talk about regarding that. You've named so many great examples. I feel like I'm even pushing it by asking.
No, I do think that, especially with the writing deadlines, sometimes they can seem very arbitrary and just really rushed. I'm somebody that when I get a script, the companies that I repeatedly work with are ones that give me time where I want to watch it and then I just want to sleep on it. I want to let the visuals marinate and I want to think about them a little bit so that when I do sit down to script write, I already have an idea. I feel like sometimes deadlines are such where you're like, do I even have time to watch the show before I start scripting? Because there's an expectation of like, it takes you an hour to write 15 minutes worth of media. That's really fast. And I don't feel like that is necessarily translates into quality at all. There are some things where you can actually cover 15 minutes of media in an hour of writing. But especially if you've got an hour-long episode of something or a feature-length film, or you're writing on a whole series, you need longer time to be able to tie everything together and to make sure that you didn't get bogged down in the tiny little, they glance this way, they furrow their brow. This isn't important. What's important in that scene, because I've now watched and sat with it, is really that under the table they held hands. But you may not notice that until like the third viewing. And it's like, oh, okay. So yeah, I do wish we really got a lot more time as writers and as narrators. I wish we got more time to live with the media during the session so that there is time to not just go cue to cue to cue, but to here's the moment you're describing. Now let's record it. I realize that would take a longer time, but I feel like that would give a much more nuanced performance of the narration instead of just, I'm going to take a stab at what it meant when it said they glance at each other. I don't know if it's happy or not because the script doesn't say. And the script writer is relying on us having heard the dialogue or have heard the music or seen the visual. And that's not always the case when you're narrating.
Wow. Yeah. And in my experience, the narration is directly connected to that audio experience of original production. That music makes an influence. If there's a comment that a character says 1 second before my cue, if I hear that, it will impact how I deliver that line. So I'm able to help support you as a writer to make sure that that message, not just the tone, but the message and the intent of what's happening comes through clearly. And those are the kinds of resources that for me as a voice talent are essential. So it's great to hear that we've got that in common. I like that.
Mm-hmm. And there was actually something that you had recently posted on social media, a very quick little blurb. And I realized like, oh, this is the audio description that I love. I love when the narrators, you had mentioned that audio description narration isn't a presentation, it's a performance. And there can be some pushback where people are like, oh, but you need to be more neutral. And I love when I can tell that a narrator is into it, that they're matching the pace of a fight scene or they're matching the pace and tone of a love scene. I think Bridgerton is a fantastic example of that, where it's like, ooh, the writing slowed down on a love scene the narrator slows down on a love scene, you're living it, and it matches the tone of it. And I just love that. So yeah, I do think that narration, when we were talking about training and all of those things, you can think like, how hard is it to talk into a microphone? It's incredibly hard to talk into a microphone and do it well. And that's something that I foolishly kind of fought back against at the very beginning of my career. Like, why would I need to take a class? Oh, then I took the class, realized exactly why I needed to take a class. And that is just as important as me taking writing workshops, is me visiting different narration workshops and voiceover. Because, while I might not, my career path, I don't necessarily want it to be, voicing a character for something. Those same skills are very important in the audio description narration, so that you're making a lively performance that matches your show that you actually want to listen to, because it cut and dry can be very boring, especially on an entertainment piece.
Sure. Yeah. And with that performance thing, I feel like it is a high wire act of a performance, that there is
Mm-hmm.
that sweet spot that if it's too much, it's gonna be a turn off, as much as if it's too little, it'll be a turn off.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is to find that sweet spot. And it's been really enjoyable to hear how not only other voice talents, but also other audience members are responding positively to that message. We've been very, in this podcast specifically, interviewing people like yourself and other voice talents, as well as writers, that these nuances really do make an impact. And it's been so fun to explore them. How about a few more questions? Where would you like to see audio description headed? I mean, I think you've answered many I think you've answered this question many times already in this interview. Anything that we haven't covered yet, that where you'd like to see AD headed?
I feel like I've been helped a lot by people along my journey of accessibility. And so I'm definitely really trying to pay that forward and put that out there, where when somebody just asks a question, it takes me no time at all. There's no consulting fee. Let's just answer your quick question, because people did that for me. And so I feel like the more that people kind of put out there into the different discussion groups and the meetups and everything, what their goals are, I would like to see more people sharing openly what their goals are, so that that way you can be like, oh, I just heard of an opportunity that matches their goal. Let me help you by just, even if I'm just telling you that opportunity exists. Did you know it's with this company right now? Like, I don't have any inroads there, but it's there. And let me try to help you connect. I would love to see just more of that happening. And I feel like it is with a lot of the meetups and groups that are out there. And especially if you've taken a class that has a very robust kind of alumni network, that really, really helps, because people now intimately know your work as well. That's another benefit of taking classes, is people really have an idea of what kind of a describer you are, so that they can help put things together for you. And then I'd come across another social media post that you had done talking about having sighted describers just kind of lay out the visuals of a project. And then there's a blind writer that is actually taking those visuals and deciding what is going to be the word choice, what's going to be the script, and what of those visuals are we going to be putting in right now. I would love to work on a project like that, where I just kind of got to say, here's everything that's happening on the screen right now, and then letting somebody else edit that down, specifically having a blind person edit that down, because we all have different life experiences, and what they're going to pull out as being essential to a story might be different from what I would. And that is something that I would dearly love to get in on. I think that would be a really, really fun way to approach a project, and a great learning opportunity.
Very cool. And for that other post that you mentioned, this was just a placeholder title because it's so clunky, but that cited person, visual asset aggregator, is
Yes.
such a clunky thing. But what it does is it establishes the role of the blind writer as being the writer, and it separates the absolute, oh, you as a writer can't write. Well, that's clearly not true. You as a writer have so many things that you're bringing to what you do, including the visuals. You're using the visuals, and so this helps establish yet another role. And again, it needs a better title, but the idea of pivoting away from, and again, specifically for film and TV, pivoting away from the title describer, which this catch-all term has been a challenge for particularly for blind professionals in trying to say, I can voice, I can engineer, I can do quality control. And by using that term describer, it almost says, okay, you have to have sight to be able to see what's happening so you can write and voice. By separating these roles, particularly in film and TV, one of the cool things about this segmentation is that we're able to say, you can do this role, or you can do this role and this role. I was not joking when I said you're an auteur. And it is many roles that you're contributing to this work. And it's something that I feel is there's still a better way to do it as far as giving a word for it, because like you had said, if you're doing live description, you're the one person that's doing all the roles. It's hard to see that translate into film and TV when there are so many different roles. And I don't know if this is just something that I need to get off the bandwagon on or continue to share. I don't want to put you on the spot. I just am curious your thoughts, since you are doing both live and film and TV, how you feel about those separations of roles as far as naming them that way.
I definitely think there's always room for more at the table, like definitely. And even in live performance, so like live ASL interpretation, that role already exists, and it's very standard in the ASL world, where you're going to have a director who, yes, they are non-hearing probably. They do not know this, but they are capital D with a deaf. And so you are going to have them be the director of the ASL interpreters. They also might be an ASL interpreter themselves. And there's going to be somebody seated in front of them helping keep them on pace because they've already practiced this. They already know it. And so like those roles already exist in the accessibility community. So to me, it's just easily translatable to putting it in the audio description community. Just audio description is newer, which it's not really, not at all, but the formalization of it with all of these different roles right now is like a ripe time to be like, what are the roles that we need to be creating? And to me, this one seems a perfect one. Why would you hire a deaf director? You hire them because they have that vocabulary, they have the cadence, and they have the structure that a non-native ASL speaker won't necessarily have. They won't know that, oh, there might be different shadings to this word. Whereas that's exactly why you hire a deaf director. And to me, having that, the visual aggregator with then having a blind person do the actual script writing, they're going to, a blind person might set up the scene differently. Like in terms of the placement of things in a space, they might have different and probably better visual relations to things in terms of, going back to that Secrets of Dumbledore, there's this great moment where we're meeting a character and the writer is like, oh, they're fawn-like. Perfect. Thank you. This is a magical creature. Fawn-like is exactly what it is. They're scaly and fawn-like. And then they said the parent is horse-sized. This is perfect. And that might be something, though, that as somebody who has their sight, you forget that you need to be including those kinds of comparisons, or that those comparisons can be as simple as it's horse-like, and so to me, it just makes perfect sense that you would have somebody who is already immersed in the world. Again, going back to the right writer for the right project, they already have all of these cultural touchstones. So why not have them be the writer as well? And if the only thing that they need to do that is to have somebody say, here's all the visuals, then that's like a very easy accommodation in my mind. You've already got people watching and being fans of this stuff. So why not just have that role?
Very cool. Thanks for the comparison too. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Going over my notes. Nope. Looks like I'm good.
All right. How can we reach you? Social media, online, websites?
I'm kind of a social media Luddite. I am on Facebook, definitely kind of active in the audio description discussion group and the ADNA showcase group on Facebook. And then I do have my website, bridgetmelton.com. And I can be emailed through that and everything as well.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.